Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's session on inclusive design to pathways to business value. My name is Ninella, and I lead the Inclusive Design for Business Impact area at the Helen Hamlin Center for Design. It's an honor to be hosting today's event. The center has a nearly 30-year history of bringing inclusive design to companies across all sectors through people-centered research, design thinking and practice, and empathy, the driving force that opens up innovation opportunities. Professor Jeremy Myerson, who is with us here today, was one of the co-founding directors of the center, together with Roger Coleman, who coined the term inclusive design as early as 1994. Inclusive Design for Business Impact was set up just over a year ago to formalize our engagement with industry, build on the rich legacy of the center's collaboration with business, and raise the value of the design discourse for economic and societal impact. The panel today will address, from their unique perspectives, the value of inclusivity thinking and design practice to business, and the call to pave new pathways in the wake of the current global situation. We live in a world of new VUCA experiences, which is beset daily by new unknowns of the unfolding pandemic. The effect on business and global economies is undoubtedly huge, but this is also felt, experienced, and lived on a daily basis and a personal level by every single one of us. Designing inclusively, therefore, has to be an integral part of the solutions finding and new models, processes, and strategies for business to pursue. I realize that this is a very big topic for us to do justice to today, but I hope that the diverse perspectives of our panelists will help give us an insight into the value of inclusive design in forging new pathways to recovery, return, and thriving. I crafted the questions to this forum to give the panelists freedom to explore and share from their unique perspective, expertise, and wisdom. And before we kick off, just a few brief housekeeping items. Each speaker will give a short presentation, which will be followed by Q&A and discussion. We're in webinar mode, which means we can't see you, but we look forward to the questions you have for us. Post them in the Q&A box. You can also like a question that resonates with you, and this will allow us to an indication of what is important. Should you experience any technical issues, please use the chat box for that. So Q&A for the questions and chat box for any technical items. This will help us with the flow of the event. Captions are available for you to use at the bottom right corner of your screen. And finally, we are recording the session, and this will be made available on our website in the few weeks to come. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Melanie Flory, psychologist, neuroscientist, and founding director of Mindrio. G. Subramanian Subbu, who is Chief Technology Officer for UK and Ireland at Tata Consultancy Services, and Professor Jeremy Myerson, our co-founding director. This is very bad form, and I do apologize to you, Melanie, but in view of today's narrative, we'll start the presentations with Professor Jeremy Myerson. Jeremy was director of the center for 16 years, and in that role has led the way in defining, developing, and deepening the practice of inclusive design with organizations across all sectors. He holds the Helen Hamlin Chair for Design at the RCA and balances this with directorship of WorkTech Academy, which looks at the future of the inclusive future of work and workplace design. It's a great honor to have him with us today and hear about the evolution of the business case for inclusive design directly from him. Over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ninella, and hello, everybody. And I'm delighted to be part of this week-long Festival of Inclusive Design. I think when we started the center, we didn't think for a moment that we could fill a week with events and cases and talks, but this is the way that inclusive design has evolved. I think the subject of the business case for inclusive design and the impact that inclusive design has had on business is something that's fascinated me for a long time. And there are lots of different ways in which companies over the years have got involved and have used the knowledge and insights. But if you look at it closely, I think there are three fundamental relationships, and they have evolved and they've emerged over the course of the last 25 years. And I think the way they have evolved says something about inclusive design as a discipline. So I think the first model, the first, if you like, impact on business is a very direct one. Business has used inclusive design to innovate, to develop new products and new services. And that's probably the best known impact on business, that inclusive design can get you to that killer idea that resonates with people. The second impact on business is really more broadly, not necessarily aiming for a product, but actually trying to get closer to customers. So developing prototypes, introducing technologies, looking very closely at the front end of the innovation process, the ethnographic side of things, and really getting closer to the customer. And the third impact, which has been more recent, is if we're trying to understand the customer, the third impact on business has been the ability to use inclusive design for business to understand itself. So there's a lot of work with inclusive design to, for example, improve internal culture or internal processes, or create a more inclusive environment in which diversity is respected, and understand the limits and the boundaries of your ability to innovate. So I think these are the three main models. And if I may, I'll just show a couple of slides to illustrate what I'm talking about. I'm going to share my screen. I hope this is going to work. Yeah. Shout if you can't see my screen. And I'm just going to go into view. Right. So Ninella, yes, you're shaking, you're nodding your head, so you can see my screen. So this is the first impact on business. This is around developing new products, and I delved deep into the archives to show you this today. This is the first real industrial collaboration. It's from 1994. It was led by Roger Coleman, who co-founded the center with me, and it was with Safeway Glass. It was with Safeway Supermarkets and Rottware Glass, and it was a wonderful idea: a square lid on a round jam jar for better grip for older people and people with arthritis. And beneath that was our first kind of commercial success, 2002, in the center, where a research associate, Matt White, developed low-cost, low-weight power tools, which were a huge success in the UK and China. And so this way of developing, getting commercial value through innovation, through understanding users. This then evolved into a second wave of impact for business, where they weren't necessarily trying to get to the end point, but they wanted to learn more about their customer base. Why were customers not buying things? Why were customers being turned off by things? Why were things accessible? Why were they not? And here you can see a test rig for a project we did with a Turkish manufacturer led by Rama Girawo about the 21st century taxi on the left. And on the right, a user shot of studying arthritics when they're cooking. And this understanding the customer is really at the heart of what this is all about. And finally, the third element, and this is the companies learning more about themselves, understanding their own culture. On the left, you can see a team from Haworth, the furniture manufacturer, looking at various prototypes and seeing the extent of how far they can push the boundaries. And on the right, an internal workshop with Bupa care homes. And this whole idea links into what has become more of a development more recently in the Helen Hamlyn Centre, bringing in elements of design thinking so that non-designers can develop within the creative process, and also the idea of executive education and training and workshops, which has been a big part of our business impact in the centre now for a number of years. This came rather later than the core product development. So I'll come out of I'll stop screen sharing and just make a couple of concluding remarks based on these three very fundamental types of engagement. I think it's fair to say that companies don't go for one or the other. They often go for a hybrid mix of all of them in an increasingly sophisticated way. And also, I would say, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, business is not the defined model of organization that it once was. You have businesses doing charitable work. You have NGOs with commercial arms. You have government doing what seems to be corporate activities. The whole relationship now between NGOs and government and what's public and what's private is all mixed up. There's always a business imperative. And at the core of it is understanding the person and the lived experience. And I think in the post-COVID era, I think getting closer to how people feel and are motivated and how they react to their world, and whether they're excluded from their world or whether they're included, is going to be incredibly important as we pivot to a new way of living and a new way of working. So I'm going to stop there and pass you back to Ninela, and I look forward to hearing lots of questions and comments during this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Our next speaker is Subbu. He's Chief Technology Officer for UK and Ireland at Tata Consultancy Services. With over 25 years of experience in technology consulting, he represents TCS Research and Innovation. Subbu leads the TCS collaboration with the RCA and the Helle Hamlin Center in particular. And over the last few years, together, we have worked on a range of people-centered projects and briefs for new and disruptive technologies. And I will now hand over to Subbu, who will share with us from the perspective of business.
Thanks, Ninela. Hello all. After the great introductory bit by Jeremy, I would like to give you a perspective of how we have collaborated with the center, and more importantly, the diverse set of use cases that we have tried to apply inclusive design to across industries. I have a few slides myself, and these are more to introduce you to Tata Consultancy Services and the work that we do, and touch upon a few of the projects that we have done jointly with the center. So Ninela, is that viewable in presentation mode?
So it's viewable in the where you can see the slides as well, so we can see everything.
Let me go back to. Yeah, are we good now? Yeah, okay, cool. So just a brief overview on Tata Consultancy Services. We are a large India-based company. As of last year, with a revenue of 22 billion. Most recently, we have been judged in terms of market value and market cap, the largest outsourcing company in the world. We work with most of customers across all different industry verticals, close to 900 plus customers in 46 countries. One of the key strengths that we have is about 450,000 employees globally, right? And proud to kind of look at about 30-35% of our workforce is women workforce, right? So in the space of consulting and partnering with the world's leading business in their transformation journey. One of the core principles of the Tata Group, of which Tata Consultancy is one of the 104 companies, is that the Tata Group itself is owned by a charitable foundation. So when it was set up as a organization which believed in returning back to the community. And because the charitable institution holds 60% of our shares, every dollar that we earn, about 50 cents to 47 cents is returned back to the community. And this is in shape of multiple organizations that we have set up for cancer research, for academic institutions, and a whole range of stuff that we do around the globe, and more importantly in India. One of the key things that we realized and we came out as a point of view about a couple of years back was what we call the business 4.0, which kind of mimics the industry 4.0. And the industry 4.0, we believe we are currently in the fourth iteration of the industry revolution, starting from steam engine to communications to mass computerization and digital, and now into this explosive area of artificial intelligence and self-driven vehicles and what have you. But the key bits around business 4.0 is there are some characteristics that we have seen that digital leaders exhibit. And some of the key ones are in terms of being able to leverage an ecosystem, right? Which is a business is not doesn't work in a silo and has to work with multiple partners, vendors. And the more the collaboration, the more the interactions, the more the business that they can gain. The other bit is the whole view of risk, right? So how do you perceive risk, and the risk, not just to mitigate risk, but also be able to embrace risk and see what the boundaries that can be pushed around that. The third characteristics is essentially how they create exponential value for their customers. And that's where some aspects that Jeremy covered also comes into picture. And you'll see that there's a fourth characteristics, which is mass personalization. And this is where I think a huge differentiation, and this is where design is a key component, and being able to have a human-centered design, and more importantly, try and see whether it can be personalized, the services can be personalized for a person of one, right? Not just a bit of service or a product that is that is generally designed for a mass, right? So that's, I think, is a key. And in this post-COVID and current COVID situation, I think we have added 3 other capabilities that businesses need to have. One, obviously, they have to be resilient, given that there are a lot of headwinds in the business space. They have to be adaptable, quickly be able to turn on a dime if you to be in one of those statements, and that has been demonstrated by a lot of businesses now. And the third bit is being purpose-driven, and this is not around corporate responsibility, etc., but this is essentially what is the key purpose of a business. If it is providing healthcare or if it is providing a retail experience, the key purpose-driven aspect, if that is where the products and services are designed around, would make a company very successful in this digital era. As far as TCS is concerned, we work across all the industry verticals, and that's another key aspect that we are able to bring in, because we see that there are a lot of benefits to work cross industry, right? So some of the design aspects, etc., which have been implemented by in a particular industry is easily transportable or easily adaptable in another industry. And more importantly, the customer or the end individual is the same, and all of these industries are targeting the services to that particular customer. So are there aspects or gray areas between industry that can be cross leveraged? Is another key aspect that needs to be considered. Excuse me. Moving on, in terms of collaboration with the center itself, I think we have been working around for about last 7-8 years, and you'll see a varied amount of work that's happened. One of the first things that we did was for Visa, in terms of a contactless charity tin, right? In this COVID era, I think it's a prescient and a very forward-looking design that was created along with RCA. Essentially contactless, which is what is a key term now in the new normal. And more importantly, we see that as in the last couple of years, nobody carries change. So is there a way to be able to tap your debit card or a credit card and just be able to withdraw a pound in charity? It's a very easy way of using this charity rather than dropping coins in a bottle. So that was the first design that we did with Visa, along with Visa and RCA. Over the past couple of years, we have been doing some great work across industry. If you look at the last 2 years, there's some work that we've done for a Far Eastern airline company around air control and air traffic control, right? Completely reimagining it. And that was a space where it was just not a design of screens or the command center. It really extended into multiple areas, including redesigning of the high-vis jacket and stuff like that. Another one that I'd like to point out is chatbots. So chatbots are dime a dozen now, and any website you log on to, you probably end up with a remote chatbot, which is robotic and automated. Now, what should be the persona of the chatbot? How should the conversation be? What should be the language? What should be the construct of those language? So there was a lot of interesting things that the center did in terms of defining the personas for various chatbots. One of the other areas that we have been working for some time jointly is in the area of elder care, and we call it living with confidence, and to see how elder care needs to be a key area that of focus both for UK government as well as across the globe. Right. The last bit that I'd like to touch upon is on vocal accessibility. This is some work that we're doing currently. It's a research project already running for last couple of years. And though it started off as something, the vocal accessibility as for visually blind, we quickly realized that in our day-to-day lives, there are aspects of situational disabilities. So for example, when you're driving the car, your eyes are on the road, your hands are on the wheel. So essentially you are partially blind and partially handicapped in that sense. So what should be the interaction with the digital world be, and with your maybe mobile phone or various other aspects? How should that be tackled, given that you are during the period when you're driving, you're partially disabled, right? So I think there's a lot of space that could be covered, and the cross industry and the experience that we have has been very well appreciated by our customers, and I think there are multiple such areas of exploration that is still to be done.
Thank you, Subbu. And finally, we have Melanie Flory from Mindrio, a consultancy intersecting neuroscience, design, and systems thinking to develop people-centered business and cultural architecture for organizations in change. Melanie and I have collaborated for over the last 6 years on the intersection of design and neuroscience, and she has been neuroscience partner for the Helen Hamlin Center for Design since 2018. I have invited her today to present from a neuroscience perspective the value of inclusivity thinking in driving design-led solutions and empathy within business. Over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Nirala. Can I have the first slide? Thank you. That was quite a presentation, Subbu, and thank you, Jeremy, as well. I've learned so much about, well, a little bit more about the Helen Hamlin Center. Inclusive design in business is by no means a straightforward. It's nuanced by culture, politics, governance, law, and a host of VUCA factors, more so now than ever. Inclusion is not just a concept or a theory or a way of thinking, it's a value. It's a value that embraces diversity beyond tokenism. It's a value that serves individuals and businesses handsomely. So how do we espouse, cultivate, and grow this value within ourselves and business and society? How indeed, you may ask, when human beings, without exception, harbor unconscious bias that is both scientifically undeniable and neurologically unstoppable. But stay with me, there's hope. Next slide. Every day, neuroscientists stretch into new, challenging, human-centered research in an attempt to understand human experience and human response. One example of this is the emerging research evidence from the field of applied neuroscience, which is yielding invaluable data and knowledge about the thinking, emotion, behavior connection. By better understanding human experiences, such as unconscious bias, anxiety, selective processing of one's environment, cognitive impairments, such as memory deficit, learning difficulties, neurovisual disorders, and even how distractibility can be used as a therapeutic intervention in the recovery from psychological trauma, neuroscientists are able to work with businesses, academia, entrepreneurs, designers, and engineers to develop products and services and end user experience that respect inclusion-based values such as quality of life for all. To overcome unconscious bias that excludes, hinders, and hurts individuals and businesses, neuroscience-based learning and development programs in diversity training, anti-bias training, empathic research, and so on, are beginning to make their way into those organizations that value inclusion as a value in itself. Next. Given today's topic, let's take a look at empathy, that primary value that shapes the designer's mindset and activities. Let's briefly look at how IKEA builds its business models and business value. IKEA's executives consistently keep their eye on emerging global challenges, and they ask themselves big, complex questions about sustainability and quality of life in a VUCA world. They ask questions about new sources of energy and materials. They explore challenges of population growth and health, lifestyle, and workplace inequalities. They ask, what if we moved beyond selling home furnishing? What would that free up reserves for investing in renewable power options? What are the tensions we face around costs, accessibility, sourcing? What if IKEA created virtual power grids that leveraged blockchain to allow customer communities to trade power with each other? With the help of neuroscientist Thomas Zoega-Ramsey, IKEA designers got a look into the unspoken, subconscious reactions of customers in Poland and the Netherlands via high-resolution EEG headsets and eye trackers. Reactions to new business models proposed via scenarios were presented, reactions recorded, decoded, and translated into knowledge for design, finance, technology, and customer service teams. Today, IKEA's business model enables customers to generate their own renewable energy. They have shifted to renewable plastics. Their restaurants offer a diverse range of healthier, more sustainable sourced foods. So keep your eyes peeled for their possible entry into the world of the food market. Next. A word on the Empathy Index. The Empathy Index was founded by a British company called the British Business. It rates companies according to their success at creating empathic cultures. It's no surprise, have a look, that the top 5 companies are Microsoft, Facebook, etc. And this actually speaks to the bottom line figures. So empathy pays off. Evolutionary as it is, the jury is in about empathy. Empathy works for people and businesses. Empathy pays. Empathy counts. Some of the factors that this particular empathy index includes are ethics, leadership, social media, inclusion, ratio of women on boards, carbon metrics, etc. These are social and business performance indicators linked to empathy and inclusion. As a neuroscientist, I believe this index to be a great start for raising business value, but recognize that this is just the beginning. Given that inclusive design depends on empathy and empathic inclusion in its very value base and its toolkit, we can do much more. Idbi, that's a nudge to you. Designers can travel further down the path of empathy, inclusion, in raising human-centeredness, business impact and value. Playing devil's advocate, my question is, what would an inclusive design-led empathy index or empathy research index look like? Next. I promise that this is not a hard sell, but do visit the Mindrio website and digest the proposal in this model at your leisure. It shows how and where design and neuroscience can intersect to create designs that are rich in inclusion, and of course, to raise those bottom line figures that are so essential for continued business growth and healthy economies. Next. So my questions, I want to end with just throwing some questions out to the designers in our audience. What would it take to move from STEM to STEAM, to include art and design in global thinking? What will get design a place on the executive boards of all those companies we talked about, as a matter of course? How can Idbi play, what role can Idbi play in educating and engaging industry in raising business value through empathy and design? And if designers could design an empathy index, what would that look like? I'll leave you to ponder those questions, and thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions if you have any. Thank you, Ninela.
Thank you, Melanie. This concludes the presentations for today's sessions, and I may add provocations. So now is the time. Please do share with us your questions, and I will kick off with a short discussion with our panelists before that. So I have a question for each one of them individually. My first question is to Jeremy. Jeremy, what was the moment for you personally when you realized that inclusive design can affect and add real value to business and innovation?
Oh, good question. I think I would have to go for when I joined the Helen Hamlyn Centre and was its co-director in the early days. We worked with the British Airports Authority on the development of Heathrow Terminal 5, massive concourse, the biggest in Europe, and they were very worried about an aging and disabled travelling public not being able to get around the terminal. And we did some ethnographic research, and I had to go and present to the what was then called the British Airports Authority, BAA, their leadership team. And I was presenting ethnographic research, and I said, "Do you want to know our main finding?" And they said yes. And I said, "Older people go to the toilet a lot in airports." And they laughed and they said, "Well, why don't you tell us something we don't already know?" And I said, "But do you want to know why they go to the toilet in airports?" And what they were doing is that they were going into the gents and the ladies in order to hear clearly streamed flight announcements. And because the acoustics in the concourse was so terrible that actually in the loo, which was ceramic lined, they could hear what was going on. And what came out of this finding was the idea of an acoustic arch, which was a semi-autonomous piece of microarchitecture in the terminal, like an information booth or a cabin. You see them all over Europe's airports nowadays. And they were really excited about this idea. And it's interesting that an inclusive design inquiry, and I loved Melanie's empathy index, you know, an empathic inclusive design inquiry ended up with a piece of innovation which was realized. And this was an information booth. You step inside and you get, you know, large graphics that you can look at close up, and you can listen to very, very clear sound. And of course, now the perfume companies and the coffee shops have taken over these booths. They've kind of commercialized them. But the idea is a very, very good one. And that was the moment when I realized that inclusive design would have business impact.
Thank you, Jeremy. My next question is to Subbu. Subbu, you talked a lot about the ways we work together, but looking forward, where do you see the greatest opportunity for inclusive design to add value to business?
Thanks, Nila. I think leading on from what Jeremy was mentioning, I think we live in a world of really personalized experiences, right? Which is what we get from, you know, even the top 5 from Melanie's list of empathic companies, Facebook, Amazon, Google. The experiences are very personalized, very targeted. So that's kind of the expectation from the world, right? So the services and products that are provided by industry and by business need to have at least some level of personalization, which is, you know, targeted. So I think that's one area that requires a lot of design, upfront thinking, rather than just doing something transactional. So that's one area. The other thing that I think through our collaboration and work and the various projects that we have done together, that we have begun to realize is that you need to design for the margins, right? So typically businesses have got short cycles. They are looking for immediate profits and begin to design for a particular set of requirements, right? And that is kind of targeted at the 75% of the features that are required for a normal human being, for example, right? And they tend to leave out the features that would be relevant for the margins of their customer base. But I think a lot of designs done by, you know, Apple and the Ford Focus car is a very good example. If you design for the margins, then they easily extrapolate into the larger audience rather than designing for just the middle 50%. So I think that's the second bit. Third thing kind of relates back to what Melanie was discussing, and I think behavioral aspects, right? When products and services are being designed, a lot of this behavioral science is kind of left onto one side. There are a lot of organizations today and businesses that are looking at nudge theory on how to get people to save for their pensions and retirement, how people should be spending their money and not really splurging it. So there are a lot of aspects of behavioral science that are coming in, be it elderly care, be it youth accommodation. There's a lot of behavioral aspects that needs to be considered, and that gets left out in the traditional design process of software development, for example. And the last bit that I'd like to point out, and I think this again falls back into some amount of neuroscience and behavioral, is around ethics, right? Given the whole space of AI, blockchain, technologies rapidly developing, the aspects of ethics is kind of a key thing that as of now has not really been a problem, but would progressively continue to be a problem. And the classic example of that is an autonomous car having a choice between knocking off an old lady or a cat. What does it choose, right? So I think that's another area. So in terms of where design and inclusive design would be contributing a lot, would be in around these 4 areas. And the last point that I'd like to in this particular question would be a customer. There are multiple industry verticals: banks, retail, manufacturing, insurance. All of them have services and products for an individual. But between those industry verticals and in the intersections of those industry verticals, there are a lot of gray spaces. So when you're shopping for a car today, you are essentially getting a retail experience at the dealer's place. And when you buy a car, you have a banking experience and an insurance experience. So should a manufacturer be looking at just manufacturing cars, or should he be giving the holistic experience for the user, by looking at the best practices across industry. I think that's a good area to look at for implementing some of these aspects and areas of inclusive design.
Thank you, Subbu. Melanie, I have a question for you, but I feel you're reacting a lot to what Subbu just said. Would you like to comment?
This is where it's really interesting. When you're looking at inclusive design, you need to be looking at inclusive research, because you've got, before the user experience, you've got the supply chain that before any product reaches the user. Who are we building that product for? This is something that inclusivity, at every point in time, if you want to look at the bottom line, you've got to look at receptivity in terms of how does everybody along that chain feel received, feel accepted, feel included? And it's a big ask, but with companies like TCS and technology that's available, we can actually bypass some of the research methods we've been using in the past to be able to access such data. And create that experience along the way.
Jeremy,
sorry.
Jeremy, you have a lot of experience of how this has played out in the past in practice. Can you give us an example of when it's been particularly interesting or challenging to navigate this space?
Well, I think that the whole issue of empathy is incredibly important, because when we started the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, I remember in the 1970s visiting a graphic design company, a very famous one called Unimark International in Chicago, who designed the original Ford logo. And I went into the design studio and they were all wearing white coats. And I thought, why are you all wearing white coats? And they said, oh, well, we're into visual science. And they had a bogus scientific neutrality about the things they were designing. And they weren't particularly empathic with the subjects or the people who were going to use their design. And what has happened with inclusive design, the single most important thing is that designers have got off the fence. They've become advocates for the user. They are empathic with their experience. When I started in the early days, we would routinely go to a focus group where they'd study people through a two-way mirror, hidden on the other side, as though they were lab rats. Of course, we got rid of all of that and we developed user forums which were open and shared. And as soon as you're empathic and not neutral, you can then be participatory as opposed to expert. And that's the most important thing I think that the Helen Hamlin Center for Design has brought to the RCA and the community around it, is that once you are participatory, you then open up avenues for co-creation and co-design and all the things that go on. And then you realize that somebody is an expert in terms of their own lived experience. And if they bring that to a creative workshop, that's every bit as valuable as the professional skills that a designer might bring, although you will need those professional skills later to achieve resolution. So I think that empathy is at the core of inclusive design. And what's interesting is that we were out on we were kind of, out there bobbing on the ocean rather nervously with this empathic approach. But as Melanie and as Subbu have expressed, companies have caught up, because once you're participatory, then anything can happen in terms of innovation.
Thank you, Jeremy. One question that comes up time and time again in this context and also in our work on creative leadership is, can empathy be taught? We seem to think and believe and practice empathy as designers. But one of the questions from even today from our audience is, can you train empathy? Can you train in empathy? And is it something that you can measure? Melanie, would you like to answer this one?
It's a very important question, because we are born biased. It's a biological, we're biologically wired to exclude. From the age of 6 months, so unconscious bias is part and parcel of being human. from the age of 6 months, infants are moved towards homogeneous thinking. So they're excluding experiences, they're excluding voices, they're excluding various, it's all based on self-preservation. So so as we have that, because we are geared towards self-preservation, and we are, at any moment in time, we're looking at processing something like 11 million bits of information per second. So to avoid, this is another biological response that human beings have, to avoid mindful thinking. We avoid mindful thinking, which inclusion requires mindful thinking, to save energy and increase efficiency so that we can get on with life. So I would say there's an argument for, as bias is a bioevolutionary process, that empathy training is a must. It actually, it's not something that we come by naturally. It comes by practice. It comes by building those neural networks. And there's another thing that I'd like to say a little bit about empathy. It's not a one-size-fits-all empathy. So with Rama, I'm working on creative leadership, and one of the components of creative leadership is empathy. And we're looking at building a spectrum of empathy, because people are empathic on different levels. For example, in Google, one of the things that Google do well is they have turned empathy from a soft skill into a hard skill. When they interview, and some of the interviews, you actually wear a brain cap on. They're asking questions to subtly probe for empathic responses. Now, all empathic responses are not the same. So for me, as in my clinic, I'm trained as a psychologist and neuroscientist to be empathic in a different way than somebody who's a scientist who is in a lab, practices empathy. So in Google, what they do is they have people who are highly trained in what we would historically call the soft scale of empathy, trawling the net, looking for problems, looking for difficulties, bringing back those difficulties into the lab, where IT technologists, create programs and algorithms and whatever, but their empathy skills are different. Their empathy skills is about listening to the designer, being empathic about the kind of solutions they would find, and then going to solutions finding. So empathy is not a one size fits all. It is on a spectrum, and I'm really excited that in creative leadership, that one of the spectrum is empathy, because we're looking at cognitive, behavioral, and emotional components, and as a spectrum, within a spectrum of empathy. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Let's redirect slightly. Both you and Subbu talked about new types of measurement indicators and the value of empathy. There's a question from Flora McLean about inclusion is value. Do you only mean monetary? Surely you mean inclusion is a value. I'm worried that with swipe cards and no money, you have already excluded many. Many examples used in this talk mention cars and expensive items. Not everyone has the money to afford that. So what do we mean by inclusion and empathy and value? Jeremy, would you like to address this one? Can I ask you to unmute yourself?
It's a lovely provocative question from Flora. She also says, we're all lab rats now, sadly, Jeremy, being watched through our phones, which I thought was a very good comment. But yes, no, inclusion is not simply a monetary value. Years ago, we did a project on London parks. And you may think, well, London parks, they're open, they're free, they're very democratic. Well, actually, if you're in a wheelchair, certain types of paving and pathways in winter with leaves, you can't walk on them. People with cognitive differences feel exposed. People with autism, who want predictability and are hyposensitive, the changing seasons and so on is a threat to them. So parks, even a park which is free to everybody, or a London Square, is not as inclusive as you may think it is. And we came up with we looked at Russell Square and we came up with a series of proposals for enclosed areas and safe areas and a new form of flooring so that wheelchairs and mothers with buggies could move across the ground more easily in different weather conditions. So it isn't about credit cards and nice cars. It's about, in many respects, the most fundamental access and inclusion to the built environment. What's important about empathy is that, you have to understand that something that is perfectly reasonable and works brilliantly for you doesn't work for somebody else. That's empathy.
Thank you, Jeremy. Melanie, would you like to add to this answer?
Yes, and also a couple more questions that came up about empathy. I think there might be a slight, let's just clear up some things here about that empathy is a hard skill and a soft skill. These are just terminologies that we use. It's how corporates look at, empathy as a hard skill and a soft skill. But basically, biologically, we are more geared towards bias, unconscious bias. And the proof in the pudding is when you're doing, real-time measurements of people's attitudes as they look at various experiments, pictures, and all of this stuff. But as Jeremy says, empathy itself is nuanced. It's not something that, it's something you have to train at. To actually include somebody else in your thinking is something that you really have to train at, or you get better at with training. It's different when emotionally you have a tie-in to something, you have a buy-in to something, but if you don't, then it's something that you can consciously apply. It actually falls in the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex, where the higher order thinking, such as altruism, which is other-based thinking, empathy, other-based thinking, not to be confused with sympathy, which could be, I think one of the questions was, personalization, or that is slightly different. Sympathy is personalizing the emotions of another. But these are all other-based thinking. Inclusion is about other-based thinking, that ability. But it also is, you can also have exclusive empathy, which is what we do in our family lives, where you are empathic because there's a payoff for you in some specific way. And this is what some of the empathy-based training is to get people to consider empathic research as a payoff to business value, or that's an example of a payoff. But when you attach empathy to a payoff, whether that's a better relationship, the bottom line numbers are better. It actually makes for better social relationships. It depends on what you value. And that's why it is so linked with values and beliefs and attitudes. And when it's linked to that, then empathy training is entirely possible. And it is. I mean, you get companies like WordPress, Google, IKEA that heavily invest in empathy training for their staff base.
Thank you, Melanie. There is one question from Sue Timney, who reverts back one of your questions to the panel, and I would like to slightly rephrase that and direct it to Subbu. Subbu, how do you make the case for designers for working with the RCA for including us in projects at strategic level? You can unmute.
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I was getting at, the life cycles or the cycles that businesses work are very short, right? And organizations like the RCA and academia, and especially the center, Helen Hammond Center, there is a mismatch. There's a mismatch in the speeds or expectations from between business and academic, right? So the key thing I think is for identifying of people, and in some, I think one of the questions talked about the board and executives in an organization being able to realize the value, quote unquote, to answer Flora's question. The value itself is not necessarily monetary. The value is the loyalty that the customers feel to your products and services, the stickiness, the reason for customers to move from one product to another product of a competitor. So these are all the things that build into this inclusive design and personalization and how people feel about a product and service, right? Given that bit, I think it is critical that we identify the use cases which have a little bit of a longer life, right? Which are more strategic in terms of what the company wants to do or the business wants to do. And that's where I think as we looked at our business 4.0 point of view, we have included that purpose-driven aspect of it. So what we find more and more is moving from a product-centric view of the world to get into a purpose-centric view, in which case it's just not a product that you're selling. You're bundling the product with services and adjacencies that really make the user experience better, right? And that's where that inclusive design comes in, because you're thinking from from the point of view of the user or the end customer and how they consume your product or consume your service. And that's just not a transaction, right? That's a holistic experience that people have. So I think identifying those projects that need, or those use cases or problem statement that require a slightly outside in view is where I think RCA and Helen Hemlin and our engagements have been really successful. Given a transactional, creating a website, creating a nice looking AI component or a mobile app, that's something that designers can do quickly. And probably they could follow some of these principles, but not necessarily full blown. Just look at it peripherally and just include it in the product. But when you look at experience overall, I think that's where the center has been really, really helpful for organizations like us.
Thank you, Subbu. And I'd like to ask one quick question to all the panelists today, which would be, what is your vision for inclusive design and business impact? What would be your wish for it, where it should go, and what should it do?
I'm happy to go first.
Yes.
I think, when people don't refer to inclusive design, they just refer to design, and they are automatically going to take an inclusive viewpoint. And we're on that road towards that, I think.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well,
I would like to see, can I do two? I would like to see arts and design to be, so that STEM really moves to STEAM, not as a token gesture, but that we actually begin to see the value of design at earlier stages. And the corollary of that to me is when the hard evidence is there, when designers sit at the executive board meetings, much earlier in the process of planning and development, of huge organizations.
thank you, Melanie. And Subbu?
Yeah, I think my point of view would be in terms of design getting embedded into all walks of corporate life. So today we look at it from a design of a service or a product, but what about human resource department? What about legal? What about finance? Is there aspects of inclusive design that can permeate across an organization, right? And then I second Melanie's thought that design getting elevated across the organizations would really make a difference.
Thank you, Subbu, and thank you all. These are wonderful notes to end on. I'd like to thank the audience for listening, for your well-considered questions, and also for joining us today. The recording will be shared in the weeks to come, so it will be available for you to watch, or if you've missed parts of it. A huge thank you again to all my panelists, Melanie, Jeremy, and Subbu, for making this an insightful and thought-provoking session for me personally, and I hope for the audience as well. Thank you to my colleagues backstage, Jane, Bree, Vicky, Patricia, to our director, Rama Giravo, and also to everyone in the RCA who's been involved in this week, making it happen. We have our final session tomorrow at 4 p.m., which is about creative leadership and the exciting launch of our Creative Leaders Circle, which is open to anyone and there's still time to book. If the ideas and insights that were shared today have inspired you, raised questions, or you'd like to reach out to discuss any of it further, our doors are always wide open. We love to collaborate and co-create and experiment, so do reach out. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you a very blessed end of the week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.